They say a man dies twice, once when the bullet finds him, and again when his name is spoken for the last time. If that's true, then Jesse James never really died. For more than a century, his story has drifted through the smoke of the American West. Part history, part folklore, all fire. A boy from Missouri who became a symbol of rebellion and the face of a nation's rage after war. They called him an outlaw, a murderer, a Robin Hood, a hero. But behind the dime novels and ballads lies something far more human and far more haunting. This is the story of Jesse Woodson James, the man who robbed history itself. Missouri, 1847. A small farmhouse stood among fields of tobacco and corn. Inside, a mother prayed. Outside, a boy dreamed. Jesse James grew up in a land already torn at the seams. Missouri was the edge of everything, part north, part south, part lawless frontier. When the Civil War came, it didn't bring armies marching in neat lines. It brought chaos. Neighbors became enemies. Homes were burned, families divided. Jesse's older brother Frank rode off to fight with Confederate guerrillas. Not long after, Jesse followed, barely 16, clutching a revolver that felt far too heavy for his hand. They joined William Quantrill's Raiders, a band of bushwhackers who fought not for flags, but for vengeance. They struck like ghosts from the woods, leaving towns in ashes and fields soaked in blood. By the time the war ended, Jesse had seen too much to ever be young again. The Union had won, but peace had not. The land was scarred, and so was he. The war may have ended on paper, but for men like Jesse James, it never truly stopped. Missouri was crawling with militia, Pinkerton detectives, and carpetbaggers claiming victory. The Confederacy was gone, but the hatred lingered like smoke after a gunfight. Jesse returned home, his family broken, his mother watched by Union agents, his sense of justice twisted by years of war. In 1866, the first daylight bank robbery in American history took place in Liberty, Missouri. The robbers escaped with over $60,000. No one could prove it, but everyone whispered the same name, Jesse James. He had found a new battlefield, and a new enemy, the banks, the railroads, and the men who had rebuilt the nation on the graves of his people. Over the next decade, the James Younger gang would strike again and again. Banks, trains, stagecoaches, always fast, always violent, always leaving behind a legend bigger than the loot. But Jesse didn't just rob. He performed. Every robbery was a message, every escape a story to be told, and the newspapers loved it. Each new headline turned him into something larger than life. A Southern rebel who defied the North, a hero who gave the finger to power, a man who could ride through hell and come out the other side grinning. To the poor, he was a symbol. To the powerful, a curse. And to himself, he was just getting started. Jesse James didn't just live in the Wild West. He created its mythology. The newspapers of the time were starving for stories of daring men and unbroken frontiers. Jesse gave them both. Each robbery was turned into a theater, each gunfight a moral tale. One reporter wrote that Jesse gave money to widows and orphans, a claim that was never proven, but always believed. Another called him the Robin Hood of the American frontier, a thief who stole from the rich, and by doing so, stole the people's hearts. It was the age of railroads and robber barons, and in the smoke of those iron beasts, a cowboy with a revolver became the folk hero of a wounded nation. But Jesse wasn't a hero. Not really. Behind the myth was a man growing colder, harder, more dangerous. Each job became bloodier. Each betrayal more personal. The gang fractured under the weight of paranoia. But Jesse didn't slow down. He couldn't. Legends don't rest. They burn until they vanish. In 1876, the gang tried to rob the First National Bank of Northfield, Minnesota. It was a disaster. The townsfolk fought back, guns blazing from windows and doorways. 2 gang members were killed on the spot. Others were hunted down and captured. Only Jesse and Frank escaped, bleeding, exhausted, broken. The myth survived. The man began to fade. For the next few years, Jesse lived under false names, moving from state to state with his wife and children. But peace was never his companion. He trusted no one. He slept with a revolver under his pillow. He saw enemies in every shadow, and soon he wasn't wrong. By 1881, the world had changed again. The railroad men were stronger than ever. The law was learning his tricks, and the gang, the last men who rode with him, were growing restless. One of them was Robert Ford, a young man who idolized Jesse and who would one day destroy him. April 3, 1882. St. Joseph, Missouri. The morning sun cut through the curtains of a small house. Inside, Jesse James sat at the breakfast table with Robert and Charlie Ford. He was 34 years old. He'd been living under an alias, Thomas Howard, pretending to be a normal man. He laughed that morning, spoke softly to his wife and children. Then, as he prepared to leave for another robbery, he noticed a picture hanging crooked on the wall. He stood on a chair to straighten it, and in that quiet moment, a single shot cracked through the air. Jesse James fell forward, a bullet lodged behind his ear. The picture he was fixing, a family portrait, shattered. Robert Ford had fired the gun. The man who had once worshipped Jesse as a legend had killed him for the reward money and for his own name in the papers. It worked. For a while, the Fords became famous overnight, the dirty little cowards who shot Mr. Howard. But fame is a fickle friend. Robert Ford was soon reviled as a traitor, hunted and eventually gunned down himself. A shadow of the man he betrayed, and so the legend came full circle. A story of violence birthing more violence, until nothing was left but echoes. Jesse James's body lay in a coffin. But his story was only beginning. The newspapers turned his death into theater. Some said he was still alive. Others claimed to have seen him years later, riding through the dust with a half-smile under his hat. Songs were written, plays performed, books printed by the thousands, each one bending his truth a little more, until fact and fiction were one and the same. In time, Jesse became not just a man of the West, but a symbol of the West itself. A land torn between justice and freedom, law and legend. He was the outlaw America couldn't forget, because deep down, he was everything it secretly admired, defiant, independent, unyielding. And in that reflection, the country saw itself. Today, more than a century later, you can still find museums, taverns, and roadside signs claiming to hold the true story of Jesse James. But there is no single truth left. Only fragments. Letters, wanted posters, rusted guns, and the memories of a nation built on stories. Jesse James became the ghost of America's contradictions. A man who fought tyranny by becoming its mirror. A man who hated injustice but lived by his own violence. He was both victim and villain, product and producer of the chaos around him. And that is why his name endures, because Jesse James wasn't just one man. He was the question America could never answer. What happens when rebellion becomes identity? When justice wears a mask? When the outlaw becomes the hero? There were other outlaws, of course. Billy the Kid, Butch Cassidy, Belle Starr. Men and women who carved their names into the same wild earth, but none carried the same mythic weight as Jesse James. He was the first American outlaw of the media age, the first man to become famous for defying the system that created him. Before Hollywood, before radio, before the silver screen romanticized the cowboy, Jesse James had already written the script. His legend was the blueprint for every Western that followed. The noble bandit, the weary hero, the man alone against a world gone wrong. And though his gun fell silent long ago, his shadow still rides the horizon. Out in the plains of Missouri, when the wind cuts through the trees and the sky turns the color of old brass, some swear they can hear it. The faint echo of hoofbeats, fading into dusk. Maybe it's the sound of memory. Maybe it's something more. Every era makes its own outlaws. Every nation needs someone to blame and someone to believe in. Jesse James was both. A son of the frontier, a soldier without a war, a man chasing freedom through the dust. He lived fast, died young, and became eternal. And though the guns have rusted and the trails have turned to asphalt, the spirit of rebellion he embodied still flickers in the American heart. Because in the end, the Wild West was never just a place. It was an idea, a restless dream that refused to die. So who was Jesse James, really? A killer? A patriot? A thief? A folk hero? The truth lies somewhere between. He was a boy who lost his innocence to war, a man who mistook vengeance for justice, and a legend who outlived his sins. Maybe that's why his story endures. Because Jesse James is not just history, he's a reflection of all that America wanted to be, and all it was afraid to admit it already was. A land of courage and cruelty, of freedom and fury, of heroes born in gunsmoke and myths carved into memory. And somewhere beneath all the songs and stories, the real Jesse James still lingers, not as a saint, not as a monster, but as a man who lived by the only law he ever knew, his own.